Hello everyone, this is Advocate Pavan here. So today we'll be start preparing on the important kind of case laws which is required for your upcoming exam preparation. All the important set of case laws which has been asked for the exam again and again and which has been asked for the similar kind of exams. And along with that, we'll also be discussing which are the most probable kind of case laws questions they can ask you for your exam perspective is what we'll be dealing for today. So please do listen this video until the end and please do update your knowledge without fail and make sure that you are giving your best until I complete this entire pura video. Now, starting with the first important thing, in which one of the following cases was it observed by the Supreme Court that precedent should not be petrified nor judicial dicta divorced from socio-economic mores of the age? Very simple. The question says that in which case was it decided that see judicial precedents are important. Okay, in this case it was said that judicial precedents are important. They can be considered instead of consider them like a stone. Depending on the changes of the society, you need to update them. That is the major objective of this question. In which case was it decided? It was decided in the case of Bengal Immunity Company Ltd was the state of Bihar. Very important, so make sure that you're just marking it and then you're parallelly taking it. You're taking your notes and then you're learning. Okay, next question is about match the list 1 and list 2 and select the correct answer from the codes given below. List 1 speaks about what? Pith and substances. Okay. Basic structure constitution, doctrine of eclipse, rule of severability. Okay. Rule of severability. I hope by now all of you know the difference about it. So now, for example, what do you mean by rule of severability? It says that see the part of the law is unconstitutional. So for example, in a law, whichever is unconstitutional, those part you're basically removing it. And what is relevant only you're taking into consideration. Okay. Now, if you observe which is the correct answer for this question, it is basically option. If you observe the option, it's D option. That is A is basically 2. Pith and substances was decided in the case of Pikaji Narayan versus the state of Madhya Pradesh. And then second was about B. Basic structure of constitution was decided in which case it was decided in the case of B4, that is about state of Rajasthan versus Chawla. C is basically doctrine of eclipse. So doctrine of eclipse was decided in the case of Keshananda Bharati versus state of Kerala. Rule of severability was decided again in the case of which one? D1. That is about state of Bombay versus the FN Balsara. You just need to remember this. It'll be really easy. The more number of time you just practice it, as most of you have learned about case laws, it can be really helpful for you. Now the third question is about in which one of the following cases the Supreme Court held that any member of parliament, legislative assembly or legislative council who is convicted of a crime and given a minimum of 2 years imprisonment loses the membership of the house of immediate effect. That basically means what if I'm a member of a parliament. Okay, now if I'm also holding, for example, in a legislative assembly or legislative council, if I have been convicted of a crime, okay, with the minimum of 2 years, then I cannot, for an imprisonment which is for 2 years, then I will be losing my complete membership in the house. Was decided in which case? It was decided in the case of Lily Thomas versus the Union of India case. Lily Thomas versus the Union of India case. Very important case. Remember this. Now, next question. Shreya Singhal versus Union of India dealt with which case? It is basically section 66A of the Information Technology Act. Just remember that. Most of you know for the fact. This is the most repetitive questions. Now, fifth question is about Supreme Court in a PIL known as Kamalnath case evolved under what? So it was basically evolved under public trust doctrine. What do you mean by public trust doctrine? It says that, for example, there should be protection in terms of the natural resources whichever is basically being given. For example, Joby, it's used for the public uses. For example, dams, natural resources, lakes, mountains, or whatever is basically used for the public, it should be protected. And if you've heard about this polluter away principle, you've understood, no? It says that polluter away principle is like if you pollute, then you have to pay the compensation for it. So public trust doctrine emphasizes that certain natural resources are for public use specifically. Okay, that is the public trust doctrine basically emphasized about. Kamalnath case is very, 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 very important. Now, sixth question is about due to the outcomes of this case, slum dwellers were benefited. Which case the slum dwellers was basically being benefited? Just think once again. It is basically in the case of Olga Tellis versus the Bombay Municipal Corporation. Okay, Olga Tellis versus the Bombay Municipal Corporation. So many of the especially slum dwellers was basically benefited from this particular kind of case. Now, the next question is about nobody can be above the institution which he is supposed to serve. He is merely the creature of the institution. To protect the individuals as mightier than the constitution would be grave injustice. Which one of the following? Which one of the following Supreme Court, through the Chief Justice, strictly observed this? In which case was it? It is basically said in the case of, again, it comes under the B. T. Shaven versus the, yes, it comes under the T. N. Shehan versus the Union of India case. This is the correct thing. Okay. So it basically says that nobody can be above the institution which he is supposed to serve. That means nobody is above than the institution which he is supposed to serve. He is merely the creation of the institution to protect the individual as a mighty of the constitution. So, for example, this can also be given a reference to the judges in specific or to the chief justice in specific, where they can perform their duty as a sovereign, but they cannot overstep it without any kind of infringement within the constitution. Now, next case was about what? The next case is about in which of the following cases the para 7 of the 10th schedule of the Constitution of India was declared unconstitutional insofar as it bars the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Okay, so in which case the cases para 7 of the 10th schedule of the Constitution of India was declared unconstitutional. In which case it was decided it is basically unconstitutional. Again, it comes under the case of, it is C. Keto Holland versus the Zanchiel. In this particular case, what was it decided? It was decided that it is unconstitutional. Now, ninth question is about the Supreme Court of India issued a number of directions for the prevention of women in various forms of prostitution and to rehabilitation their children through welfare measures in order to provide them with dignity, livelihood, and socio-economic development. In the case of which one? It was decided in the case of Gaurav Jain. It was basically decided in the case of which one? Gaurav Jain versus the Union of India case. Gaurav Jain versus the Union of India case, where they mentioned about what they emphasized about, the Supreme Court emphasized about the prevention of women in various forms of prostitution and to rehabilitate the children through welfare measures in order to provide them with dignity, livelihood. So you need to provide a prevention in various forms of prostitution to stop it. So stop the what prostitution and to support them with different kind of amenities in terms of dignity, livelihood, and socio-economic development. Now, the 10th question is about what? 10th question is about match the list of cases that has basically been given over here. So I will directly go to the answer so that I can preserve your time too. It comes in option B. That is about M. Nagraj versus Union of India case. That is basically M. Nagraj versus Union of India case. It comes in to provide reservation for the promotion of SC/ST. Indra Soni versus Union of India case is basically which one? Indra Soni versus the Union of India case. It is coming under the to provide reservation for. So if you observe B3, okay, B. So Nagraj versus Union of India. It is basically about. I'm just highlighting over here so that we don't mess it up. Okay. Yes, correct. So B. Nagraj was Union of India. It is basically 3 application for the removing of OBC quota. Okay. Indra Soni versus Union of India. What was it? Indra Soni versus Union of India. B is basically to provide reservation for the promotion of SC/ST community. There was a cap limit beyond 50%. You cannot provide reservation, right? That was decided over here. Now, C is about Mohini Jain versus State of Karnataka. In this case of national security was basically discussed over here. A.K. Roy versus Union of India case. What happened over here on capitation fees was basically decided over here. Now, 11th question is about what? In which of the following decisions Supreme Court frames guidelines for safeguarding the interest of death row convicts? So safeguards for the death row convicts. For basically, uh, what all other important guidelines was released in this particular case, I'll just discuss with you quickly. So first of all, this case was in the Shatrang Chauhan versus the Union of India case. In which of the following did the Supreme Court frame guidelines interest of the death row convicts? So over here, if you try to highlight over here one by one, there's a small glitch over it. It's basically Shatranga Chau. I've just made a small mistake over here while I was just typing back over here. Shatrughan Chauhan. Shatrughan Chauhan versus Union of India case. So, in which of the cases did Supreme Court frame guidelines for safeguarding interest of death row? It was basically Shatrughan Chauhan versus the Union of India case. So, here they basically said about right to receive notice of rejection of mercy petition. That means, like, if I am given a death penalty or something like that, okay, or for this particular case, so when I'm applying it for president, I'll be getting what? A mercy petition. So if president rejects the mercy petition, I must be informed, obviously, through a notice. That was basically decided in the case. First one. Now, 14 days for rejection and execution. For example, after rejection of the execution, this one mercy petition, within 14 days my death will be happening, right? So those 14 days time period should be given. And also mental health evaluation needs to be provided, and solitary confinement should not be provided, like strict kind of punishment should not be provided at this particular stage. Why? Because after 14 days he's going to die. So this is one thing which is also being decided in this case. Now next question is about what? Next question is about accountability makes the exercise of power more efficient and effective. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus said that the Greek had a law. They were not absolutely free. They had a master called the law. So this was basically in which case, this was basically in the case of CGI as the. So if you observe in the accountability in the, yes, one second, I just. Yes, here if you observe, accountability makes the exercise of power more effective and efficient. The ancient Greek Herodotus said that the Greek had a law. They were not absolutely free. They had a master called the law. So this is basically CJ as a master of roster must act fairly, justly, and not arbitrary manner. This is the right answer. Okay. Here, what do you mean by master of roster? Master of roster basically means that, see, for example, the principle of master roster is like the principal CJ decides the bench formation and allocation. So what case should be heard in the Supreme Court? Will be decided by whom? Will be decided by the Chief Justice of India. And that comes under which principle? Master of roster principle. Okay. Now, next case about SP Gupta versus Union of India. It was held that the word constitution means what? The word constitution means what? The constitution means assertion, as the ascertainment of opinion. It's called as what? Ascertainment of opinion. 14th question. Okay. In which of the following cases did the Supreme Court hold that Chief Justice is an institution himself? Which case it was decided that Chief Justice is an institution himself? In which case was it in SP Gupta versus Union of India, Ashok Pandey versus Union of India, Kasmin Jaiswal versus Union of India, Prashant Bhushan versus Union of India case? It Chief Justice is an institution himself was basically decided in which case? It was basically being decided in the case of, think once again. I'm just giving you 5 seconds to think. What would be the answer for this question? So the answer is basically Ashok Pandey versus Union of India. Okay, Ashok Pandey versus Union of India. It was decided that Chief Justice is an institution himself. Now, next question: in which of the following cases Chief Justice held that the Master of Roster, who alone has the prerogative to the constitute benches? So learn about this Master of Roster because questions are coming again and again over here. So Master, in which of the following cases was the Chief Justice held that Master of Roster, who alone has the prerogative to constitute benches? It was decided in which case? It was decided in the case of Prakash Chandran versus Union of India case. Okay, Prakash Chandran versus Union of India case. Please do learn it. Keep on practicing. It will gradually come. Okay, which of the following cases is in connection with the parliamentary privileges? The parliamentary privileges was Keshav Singh versus the Speaker of UP Assembly. Okay, parliamentary privileges was basically decided in this case. Now, in which of the following judgments was not overruled by Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India? So it was basically, if you observe, it is actually Govind versus the state of MP. So which of the following was not overruled by Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India? It was basically Govind versus the state of MP. Okay, it was not overruled because in this case they decided that privacy is basically a fundamental right, uh, and basically what happened, there should be no there is with reasonable restriction should be provided. So that was basically it. So they didn't overrule this particular case, but whereas in other three cases they basically they didn't, they overruled again and again. For example, in MP Sharma versus Satish Chandra, they overruled and held that extend and denied privacy as a right. So that was one thing. And whereas ADM Jabalpur versus the Shivkant Shukla case, they decided fundamental right is valid during the emergency. They just overruled it. But in Govind versus state of MP, they didn't overrule it because they realized that privacy is part of one of the most important structural function. But however, it cannot at any point of time become more ultimate. So yeah, wish you all the best. Good luck for your upcoming exams. Take care. Please do like, share, and subscribe this video. Make sure that you are taking down the screenshot of this entire video. If you require any help, let me know in the comments. Take care. Goodbye. Thank you.